I've just been glancing through videos and I came across one about hardest prisons. You get these sort of reality TV style documentaries. Anyway, it was a women's prison in the States, and part of the segment was on drug use. And I was looking at some of the comments below, and they were the sort of comments I often see in anything related to drugs, which was sort of um, the undertones were about sort of portraying it as victimhood. Now I want to talk a bit about this because it's something I come across a lot, and it's something that does bug me a bit, and I'll try and explain why. Firstly, why people take drugs, is a wide range of reasons for it. It could be peer pressure. It could be that they think it's a way to deal with something in their life. It could be they think it'll be a kick. But I think something that is hugely overlooked in the drug debate is responsibility. Now, people are going to say I'm conservative here or I'm puritanical. I don't believe I'm either. I believe I'm being common sense, and I'm not puritanical, just not extreme. And let me explain what I mean by that. I cannot comprehend the argument that some people try to make that putting a dangerous chemical into your body, I'm obviously talking about drugs like hallucinogens, the sort of drugs that alter your thinking. I mean, any drugs used excessively can be dangerous, but it really bugs me when people say things like addiction is, you're a victim if you're suffering from addiction. It's a disease and so on. Now, I accept the argument that addiction is a disease, because when someone's got to the point of addiction, then they're in a trap. But one thing that bugs me is people always seem to overlook the fact that the addict, in most circumstances, has chosen to take the drug in the first place. Now, this bugs me because I do not think you can compare someone who has an addiction because of their own action. They've developed into that state of addiction because of the action they initially took, and that is entirely their responsibility. I do not think you can compare that to, for example, someone who has, let's say, been in a serious road accident and they've been horribly scarred because of some reckless driver, i.e. not their fault. You cannot compare the two situations. And a lot of this is in the context of people saying, oh, why do we criminalise addicts? Now, I agree with that. I don't think we should criminalise people for having an addiction unless they've committed a violent crime to feed their addiction, i.e. violent robbery or something. I agree that the focus should be on rehabilitation, and I agree that there should be a humane approach to it. But where I disagree with these people is, and what I mean is people who advocate that it's entirely victimhood, where I disagree is they take away all responsibility from the addict. And I just think that's ridiculous, because with the exception of someone who has been spiked, or say someone who has been forced by a gang to take drugs, and I appreciate sometimes you have those situations, but more often than not, it's people who wanted a cheap thrill, and then they didn't know when to draw the line and they got addicted. Or it's people who have used hard drugs as a way to cope with a difficult time in their life. Now, that's why I think it should be a humane approach, but it's still personal responsibility. Now, before people say that I'm being puritanical, I'm not clean. I've smoked. There's times I've drank excessively, but you know what? In those situations, if I got lung cancer, if I got liver disease, I couldn't turn round and say, oh, well, it's not my fault, it's society's fault, or oh, it's the fault of the beer producer, or the brewer, I should say, or the tobacco company. In the end of the day, if you are a free-thinking adult and you choose to take any sort of substance that you know could be addictive at some point, and you don't use that responsibility, you cannot blame anyone but yourself. It's different if you're forced to do it. If there's like bullying, peer pressure, or something like that. I do think that's different. But the problem with this whole debate is that people are focusing on the fact that addicts are criminalised. Now, I understand that's a contentious issue, and I don't think it's the right approach. At the same time, I don't believe in treating them as victims in the same way as someone who is absolutely not responsible for the suffering they're going through. Now, addicts, yes, they deserve compassion because we all make mistakes in life, but don't tell me that someone who has made a choice to take drugs is a victim. It's not the same thing. Now, it may be, like I say, that they have done it because they're dealing with a terrible situation in their life. Now, they're a victim from that point of view. But what bugs me is that people act as if these people haven't made a choice. And they act as if it's some little thing. I do believe that taking an illegal Class A drug it's not a normal thing to do. Let's not pretend it's a normal thing. And let's not pretend it's okay. You know, I heard one guy on the comment section saying like, oh, well, there's nothing wrong with it. It's not immoral unless they hurt anyone else. And so basically, it was trivializing it. Well, actually, in almost every situation, addicts will commit crime to fuel their habit. Because they're at a point where they cannot think any other way. So, I have never heard of an addict who hasn't at some point resorted to crime to feed their habit. And actually, it's, you know, you can argue, well, it shouldn't be a crime in the first place to use drugs. Well, okay, that's one argument. But the point is, it is an offence. So someone who voluntarily takes an illegal substance, knowing it's illegal, has voluntarily broken a law. Which, that's a responsibility issue. If I go into a nightclub, and I want a good time, and I go up to someone I know to be a dealer, and I pay him or her £50, and they give me a bag of whatever, ecstasy tablets, and then I get addicted to them, I cannot turn round and say, oh, well, I'm a victim, because I'm now in this situation where I'm addicted to this substance. You know, and people will say I'm being very judgmental. Maybe I am, and I'm sorry if it sounds that way. I'm not a perfect person, and I'm not saying I am. I'm not a monk. I am not clean. There's been times when I've been drunk. There's been times when I smoked. But what I don't do is blame other people for the side effects of those things. In other words, if I wake up with a hangover after drinking too much, I've no one to blame but myself. And I apply the same principle to people who take drugs. If you voluntarily take drugs, don't blame other people for that. Unless you have been spiked, unless you've been bullied into taking it, don't blame others. Because it's a cop-out, and it's not going to solve any problems, actually. Because if we treat drug addicts like victims, then it doesn't actually address the root cause, which is prevention. I appreciate there's issues to do with, I appreciate that many people argue that criminalising is the wrong approach. I think that's a valid view, and I would go along with that. Because, you know, someone who's injecting heroin into themselves, they aren't harming anyone but themselves. But it really pisses me off when people try to make out that drugs are a good thing. With the exception of drugs for medicinal purposes, do not try to tell me that putting a chemical into your body is good for you. That is just not logical thinking. Say what you want. I mean, from my perspective, the only people who justify it are drug addicts, or drug users, or dealers. They're the only people who say it's a good thing. Unless it's for a medicinal purpose, then I really don't see how you can rationally argue that's a good thing. I sometimes drink, but I would never argue that excessive drinking is good for you, because that would just be stupid. Likewise, sometimes I smoke. I would never ever try and say, oh, it's good for you, because that's just stupid. Of course it's not good for you. It's a bad habit. But I'm not going to be puritanical. I do it. So likewise, if we're going to say legalize drugs, okay, fine. But for goodness sake, don't say that it's good for you. And let's not pretend that drugs don't cause the problems they cause. The fact of the matter is, drugs are a plague on the world. They cause enormous problems. This is a fact. Now, you could argue about legislation and the sort of effects that has. We know there's very bloody conflicts in parts of Latin America and other parts of the world connected with drugs. The issues are very complex, but I just don't see how anyone can argue that drug use in itself is a good thing. Unless it is for pain relief, like I say, for medical purposes. But let's get real. A lot of people don't use drugs for medical purposes. They use drugs because they want either to escape from the pressures of life, or they want some excitement. That's a fact. Now, I suspect there's going to be a lot of people who are ex-addicts who are going to say to me, I don't know what I'm talking about, and I'm judging them, etc. I'm not judging you in the sense that we all make mistakes in life. I don't think you're bad people. Okay, if you're an ex-addict and you're watching this, I'm not saying you're a bad person. I'm just saying take some responsibility. Don't blame on everyone else. Because I think it's childish. And it's, in the end of the day, you made the choice to take the drug. So take some responsibility. I have sympathy for whatever it may have been that led you to take the drug. People go through some terrible experiences in life, and we're all human. No one's robotic. So the decision to take the drug might be understandable, but it is still, the point here is it's about responsibility. That's all I'm trying to say. And I'm just fed up of hearing this line that drug users have no responsibility, because they do. Unless they're children, unless they've been spiked, or unless they've been bullied into it, then they absolutely have responsibility. And I really would like to see more of that in the debate. And it's not a case that I'm being puritanical. Like I say, I'm not clean, I'm not a health fanatic, but if I get hungover from drinking too much, that is my responsibility. If I ultimately develop lung cancer because I smoke too much, I can't turn around and blame tobacco companies. It's stupid. It's a bit like, if I've heard of cases in the States of people eating far too much fast food then trying to blame McDonald's for it. Of course big corporations have responsibility, but so do individuals. If you're a free-thinking adult, you have responsibility. We all do. I do, you do, anyone watching this video does. So I'm not trying to be holier than thou, I'm just saying we all have responsibility. And I'd like to see more of that in the debate about drugs. If you're someone who's struggling with an addiction, I don't have malicious intent towards you. I hope you get through this, but it is your responsibility to make whatever steps are necessary to do it. Don't blame others for it. I wish you well, but do not blame others.